Hi, I'm Greg Favre, captain with the St. Louis Fire Department, and I'm here to talk today about my thesis, The Ethical Imperative of Reason, how anti-intellectualism, denialism, and apathy threaten our collective national security. Now, my thesis explores the roots and manifestations of anti-intellectualism, denialism, and apathy. Now, it's philosophical in its design. It's not addressing a specific problem, but more globally an issue that we're having in our conscious discussion in this country around homeland security and domestic national security policy. My research question is, what are the potential effects of cultural anti-intellectualism on the construction of policy designed to impact our homeland security? Specifically, my thesis focuses on how a course of action is created, presented, messaged, laid out to the public, and ultimately executed by homeland security professionals. My findings indicate that anti-intellectualism impacts the highest levels of political, media, and security processes. And as such, they require practitioners to acknowledge and address their influence. Now, my thesis concludes by arguing that widespread ignorance of objective reality, of good data sets, of good information that's been academically, scientifically verified several times over, provides a threat to not only our security, but to the democratic process. And finally, it concludes by offering three overarching strategies that I think can limit its influence and sphere. In the 70s, 80s, and 90s, Carl Sagan was famous for saying, in a world so exquisitely dependent on science and technology, hardly anyone knows anything about science and technology. Now, this affects the quality of decisions that we're capable of making. It impacts every corner of the national security and homeland security processes. From immigration policy to nuclear proliferation, domestic military operations to cyber internationalism, anti-intellectualism has the effect and the capability of limiting our sphere of influence and our ability to keep our country safe. First, we looked at what anti-intellectualism is. Hofstadter in the 1950s and 1960s gave us our best definition, saying that it's resentment and suspicion of the life of the mind and those who are considered to represent it, as well as a disposition constantly designed to minimize and undervalue that life. Now, this is ever present in our country. It's cyclical. We've seen this time and time again as our country has ebbed and flowed. But we're seeing a different strand. We're seeing a different manifestation of anti-intellectualism now, largely in part because of the type of sources that we draw from. We have the ability with the internet, with specific cable media biases, to draw on information that secures us in our own worldview and shuns the data and information sets that have been academically, scientifically verified. Data sets that may offer a different course of action, a better course of action to protect our country. Now, anti-intellectualism is woven into an individual's mentality through cultural norms, through a religious upbringing, through social status, through personal desires. It can be a combination thereof, and it's not necessarily bad, it just has to be acknowledged. Also, it should be noted that anti-intellectualism, especially in today's current age, can be largely profit-driven. Next, we look at denialism, which replaces the rigorous and open-minded skepticism of science with the inflexible certainty of ideological commitments. Denialists also often conflate similar but very distinct information and treat them as one. They use logical fallacies to come up with unshakable beliefs. They use arguments that contain fractions of quality information, and they're taken out of context and wildly selective. Denialism, as author Michael Specter once argued, occurs when a portion of the populace struggling with change turns away from reality and towards a more comfortable lie. And finally, we look at scientific apathy, known as scientific illiteracy. This is caused by individuals who have an aversion to science or who are willing to take very specific information that fits their quality of life, where they are highly informed and deeply wrong. So using these three broad-based definitions, anti-intellectualism, denialism, and apathy, we used a case study methodology. We looked at three different case studies. We looked at climate change, we looked at vaccines, and we looked at the military operation Jade Helm, a domestic operation last summer that took place in the United States. And what we came away with was pretty interesting. In climate change, for example, We found that the Pentagon, the Navy, the Army, the Marine Corps, and the Coast Guard have all issued reports totaling more than 50 in number, saying that the importance of climate change cannot be overstated. Its impact is far-reaching. It affects not only national security and global security, but also the very continued existence of our species. It affects transportation, agriculture, our ecosystems, biodiversity, land usage, ultimately human health. And so, while 97.6% of the academies of arts and sciences around the world has said that climate change is occurring right now and is probably man-made, here domestically, we still have a policy debate raging in our political spectrum, in the presidential election, and with our regulatory usage in Congress about whether climate change even exists. Now, this issue has long been settled by the scientific community, and it's time that our policy and regulatory structure catch up, addressing not only the issue itself, but how we move forward in limiting its impact in our collective security. The Army, for example, has noted already that global warming will include both direct and indirect effects on humans, infrastructure, and the natural environment relative to the Army's strategic mission. The Navy itself has said that projecting U.S. undersea dominance in light of changing physical properties is going to impact the ability of the Navy to do their job correctly and secure the country. These reports specifically note that the risk posed or exacerbated by extreme weather, including recession of seas, droughts, severe storms, diminishing river levels, it'll impact the strategic priorities of this country in a way that we've not yet seen. This is a very serious and pressing issue, and we can't even agree that it's happening yet. For the second case study was vaccines. We know that the data was a forged study. Late in the 90s, a malicious, misleading, and false data set by a doctor who was purposefully trying to give bad information led to a national outcry of concerned parents. Now, a report tells us that 20 to 30% of this country qualify as vaccine hesitant, meaning they may or may not take vaccines if required. Now, to be sure, the pediatric debate around immunizations is a serious public health issue. But what happens when the same vaccine-related concerns and ill-conceived reasoning are extrapolated out onto a national security topic? Say, for example, a biotoxin. If the same 20 to 30% of this country are vaccine hesitant for something that may save their child's life, how willing are they going to be to take a vaccine for something that a terrorist puts out? Something that the CDC says, we must get to your local community center, you must take your vaccine, this is very important. To be sure, our own anti-intellectualism has the ability to serve as a force multiplier for those who wish us harm. The third case study looks at Jade Helm, a domestic military training operation that got so spun up by conspiracy theorists that the director of the FBI and the Secretary of Defense had to assure citizens of this country that their own military was not coming in to take their land or their property, despite cries from the Texas governor that he was going to activate the state militia to make sure that the federal government did not actively strip any Texans of their individual liberties and rights. So what does this all mean? As the case studies in my thesis show, the impact of anti-intellectualism, apathy, and denialism are a significant challenge in both the practical and theoretical applications of domestic security policy. These are complex and nuanced issues. They have the potential for harming our national security, and while decision-making on these issues can never be devoid of the political, of the ideological, and economic influencers, practitioners in the Homeland Security field can work to bypass and minimize these anti-intellectual biases. My thesis ends by offering 3 simple overarching pillars for the national and Homeland Security practitioner to discuss, reflect upon, and act when talking about anti-intellectualism. While these aren't applicable in every circumstance, they provide tools which practitioners can build arguments around. The first is that we need to go back to ethical models. We need to actually think about how we think about anti-intellectualism. And we do this by going to Kantian. We do this by going to Immanuel Kant's ethics. We do this by going to Rawlsian ethics, models of how we should act. These tell us that we have a duty to ourselves, to our country, and to our fellow man to act within the best parameters we have out, the best parameters we know to make decisions based off of. The second pillar is that we must get comfortable traveling the exponential arc. The current rate of technological and scientific change is leading a pace of innovation that is unmatched in our history. We are currently rewriting the very fabric of human society. And with these challenges, from self-driving cars to bitcoins to cyber internationalism versus cyber nationalism to self-synthesized DNA, we have issues that are on the horizon that need to be addressed and are only going to become more complex and come quicker at national security practitioners. The impacts associated with these transformations will fundamentally alter life on this planet, including security policy, our regional stability, threat patterns, and national resiliency. And yet, standing on the precipice of this new world, one that will be ushered in whether we're ready for it or not, we continue to have debates around science and technology that in many cases is 25, 50, or in the case of vaccines, more than 100 years old. If this failure continues, the cost of our continued anti-intellectualism will remain far too high to address the coming challenges of tomorrow. Which brings us to our third pillar, the willingness to embrace uncertainty. National and Homeland Security professionals must remember that inaction in the face of uncertainty is just as detrimental as the wrong action. The threat palette that our country faces is dynamic, it's nonlinear. In discussing complex issues like climate change, it's difficult to point at defining start dates, best measures, or even the nuances of what success looks like at this point. But the ambiguity of complex issues cannot be used as an excuse for delaying action. Now, Karl von Clausewitz, anybody who's studied military history knows that in On War, he says that threats are hidden more or less in the clouds of uncertainty. And it's in this uncertainty that all actions must, to a certain extent, be planned at a mere twilight. Now, the idea here is never to make rash decisions, but also to move with effectual action. That we should move with the best data available and not be squandered while trying to gain more information or wait for the right political moment to make hard decisions. The world is far too dynamic to seek a perfect solution, and so practitioners should focus on the best available plan of mitigation, and rather than failing to act and allow the threat to exacerbate. And finally, we must move with courage and resolve and unwavering commitment to the ideas that the Republic were founded on. National and Homeland Security professionals have to be encouraged to develop the strength to do bold things. So in conclusion, it's important that we understand and account for anti-intellectualism, because our world and our nation sit precariously at the dawn of a new epoch. When it comes to the promise of our greatest advancements, coupled with what will undoubtedly be our greatest challenges, we must demonstrate a willingness to cast off the false comfort that comes with unknowing. We must move beyond fear. We must be emboldened by what we can accomplish when the fortitude of the human spirit is coupled with a country inspired. Now, if we're to remain secure and serve as an advocate for the advancement of all people, we must welcome debate of the known facts, however uncomfortable they make us. The true testament of a country's resiliency is measured not in the moments of prosperity that it enjoys, but in those moments that require a collective unity behind a worthy endeavor. In the face of growing anti-intellectualism, we must be willing to do what is hard if we hope to achieve what is great. Thanks for watching.